Hey guys, Solomon here again. This is part 3 of our video. To recap, on part 1 I kind of walked you through the API management highlights from the different portals that come as part of the API management. Part 2 is I covered the REST APIs. I showed an example. I walked through an example that I wrote that used REST APIs. And I kind of tested it. I did deploy that application in the WebSphere application server Liberty profile within Eclipse, and we've tested it to make sure it does work. And of course, part 3 of this video, this tutorial of end-to-end solution that takes you from Worklight to WebSphere application server APIs that are exposed through the API management. So in part 3, we're going to basically take those APIs that we defined, which is one of them really, the get rates. I'm going to go ahead and create that API and expose it in the API management. What I'm going to do is I will create multiple plans, one with limited access and the other one with unlimited access. I'm going to call the unlimited one a gold plan and the limited one a silver plan. And we will then test it out when we get to the point to show you how you can see the APIs, how they're being used within the system through the analytics side. Like if we look, for example, at the analytics part where we can display how the APIs are being used, and we also can show you how you can put limits on their access. For example, I will define them as 5 APIs per minute, and that means on the 6th call within a minute, it's basically going to get rejected. And that's what we will basically show as part of this particular demo. So let's get started. The very first thing I would like to do, now remember I did create an organization that's called Soloman World Bank, which is in here. And of course the owner of it is this barg0018@gmail.com, and that's my email address. So I'm going to go ahead in the environment, click on it, and I'm going to define a new environment for us. The new environment, I'm going to call it Soloman Prod environment. I'm going to make it restricted such that not everybody can use it without approval. And then for the URL path, which is basically like you see in here, the SB is where things show. SWB is the URL path for the Soloman World Bank, and SB is the short name that you can add. And this one I'm just going to say solpd. Now I would like to bring something to your attention, which is you might run into. Notice if I put uppercase D in here and I click add, I will get an error message that tells me that the short name field SOD used to prepare URL for the API is not valid. Should be a valid DNS name. What this tells you when you do see this error message, basically it all has to be lowercase. So this should be SPD. Beyond that, I think we should be good. We are not defining the gateways because we only have one, but if you happen to have different kind of gateways, for example, for the cluster that you want to use, one for production, one for development, this is where you define them. So let's go ahead and add this solpd environment, and here it is. Now we have it. And this is the URL to access this particular gateway or this particular environment. So from a user registry perspective, like I mentioned earlier, I would continue to use the one sandbox. If you want to use a different one, just like we defined in the user registry in here, there's only one, but you can actually go ahead and create a new one if you want, a new user registry or a new local user registry that you want to just simply point to your own environment and use. For the purpose of this, we are not going to create anything new. I'm just going to continue to use the one and only, because like I said, I have limited number of users, which is myself only with email addresses, so I'm not going to make this too complex by creating too many email addresses, as there's no benefits really from showing you this. One email address should be good enough. So from a user's perspective, right now we have that user, and as I mentioned in part 1 when I defined it, that Soloman or Barg0018 is the organization owner. It's the administrator, the product manager, and the developer. So it's all in one. You can separate them, but for the purpose of this, I am not going to do the separation. This is for a real application in a real organization. But for now, I'm just trying to kind of get things going. So the next step for us to do is under the consumers, as you see, I don't have any consumers, and I would like to define them now, because the consumers is the one that you're gonna basically go ahead and specify who's gonna be using your application. So let's say I'm just gonna say this is Soloman B, and I'm gonna say the owner of this particular consumer, and I'm just gonna use my guess it's, I'll use my IBM email address, um, and save this one. Okay, and I guess just to make sure that I specify it, so I'm just saying Soloman IBM, so I know it's an IBM account that I'm trying to use. And I'm just gonna do, yes, go ahead and please add it. And now I have this particular one created. Um, so next after this, let's go ahead and go to the plans section, because once you define an API, to be able to test it, you need to make sure you have a plan. So these are the things you kind of prepare your system with from a plans perspective, from a consumer's perspective and users. This is kind of done once for the most part, and beyond that, it's just a matter of defining APIs and just start using what you have from a plans and consumer's perspective. So let's go to the plans. And as I mentioned earlier, I would like to define two plans. One that I'm going to refer to as the, it's going to be the gold plan, and the other one is going to be the silver plan. Okay, so this one I'm going to say this is my gold plan, and I want access for this one, so I don't want anybody to use it without actual approval. And this is going to say gold plan to access the World or Solomon World Bank API to get interest rate, no restriction, if I can type, exist for this plan. All right, so add it. And also I would like to add another plan, and that plan would be called the silver plan, and there would be no accesses required and approvals. And I'm just gonna do silver plan, add Solomon World Bank API to gangster race, and we're gonna say here restrictions do exist for this plan. Only 5 API calls a minute are allowed. Okay, so we've done that, and as you see now, just it's straightforward and simple. These are the two plans that are created, so I'm just gonna go ahead with these two plans. Now let's go into the APIs. Now if you notice under the plans, right, we have the default plans that we created, and these plans, obviously there's the two environments that I have. I have the sandbox environment and the Solomon prod environment, and you'll know what those means in a minute when we get to them. And of course, as you see, you can define multiple versions of it as well. So if you want to make some changes, so I'm clicking on this API, I want to add the restriction. This is where you add it, and at this point I have no restriction, have unlimited. But anyways, we'll get to this, so you don't have to worry about it just yet. Let's go to the APIs now. So in the API case, you have the option of defining either a REST API or a SOAP API. And what I'm going to do right now is define a REST API, because that's what I specified within the WebSphere application server Liberty profile. That's when I deployed my application for getting the rates. So I'm going to get, I'm adding a new API, so I clicked on add, and this is going to be get interest rates by type. That's my API, and I'm just going to say get rates. And please make sure again it's all lowercase. I'm going to say this is an API to return the interest rates based on type. And I'm going to say the type of this API is going to be short, long, or jumbo. And the API also takes the first name of the user. And the reason I made it do the first name, because when I deploy my Worklight application, I would like to say Solomon requested this specific information, and here's the rate that's being returned to Solomon or John or whoever. Okay, and click add. Okay, so now we have the API. I can go ahead and click on this particular API that I just created. And notice that when from identifying the application using, you have the client ID, you have the client ID and secret or none. I'm gonna define this one with a client ID and secret, and that basically means that when you define that API, you will need the client ID and the secret that will be generated when we do the application, and would be part of the URL that you actually issue. And part of the test we're going to do initially in part 3 of the video before we get into Worklight is basically the ability to issue that request from a browser where you can see that I am talking to the gateway. I'm not even talking. I don't even know where WebSphere is located, where the API are located. All that's done behind the scene, away from you, and I'm passing the information that will basically get me what I want, and it will pass that call on, and it will keep track of what I'm actually trying to access. It's gonna be all apparent to you once we get that done. So let's go ahead and specify one with the client ID and client secret. And I'm gonna go ahead and add the resource at this point. Okay. And the resource that I'm trying to do, now go back to the URL so I can show you how you can do this. So this is the URL when we call the method, and as you see we got it with type equals short or long or jumbo and first name equals whatever you want to add. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy it from the place just before you do the question mark, so that's the records in this case. Okay, and I'm going to add this into the path, and this is the path that I'm looking for. As you see, this is going to also give you an example of how you can do this, right? I mean, in this particular example, we're having the other path. If you remember, I showed you different ways of doing the, the, the jax-rs or web or REST service. And this is kind of one example, either as a parameter with a question mark, and then you do the type equals value, or you can actually do it as path parameters instead of query parameters. Okay, or both. In this case, it's showing you here's the query parameter. I'm sorry, the path parameter. Here's the query parameter. So what I'm going to do in here, I'm just going to copy the record, and it's irrelevant. I guess it's. Let me just take this out of the way for a second so I can show you. It is irrelevant really what you specify in here. Just you can do anything, like just put some default values, which is first name equals Solomon and short name, and just do the records. For the display name, I'm just gonna say get let's say interest rate by type, and description, return the interest rate based on type. All right, and we have done that at this point, and what I'm trying to get, this isn't going to be a post, this is only a get. Of course, you have the option, you can have get, post, put, or delete. Of course, this is what REST allows you to do. So in my case, I'm just going to get rid of the post. I'm just going to do a get, and I'm going to go ahead and do an add. Okay, now notice that we did do the add, and now this is the method that I have. I would like you, after you do this, to click on the edit button or this pencil here, and that will open up another tab for you, or another section. There's the overview section, and as you see, it really recognized that I have two parameters, the type and first name, right? And which you can enter some values, and it tells you if they are required or not. Of course, in my case, they are required, so I'm going to say first name default is Solomon. I'm sorry, the type is short, and here I'm going to say this is Solomon for the first name. Now, click on the implementation tab, and that you will have a proxy or an assemble. An assemble is when you start adding the request and the response and add whatever you want with it. I will defer this to a different video that I'll do where I'll explain more of how you can assemble your request. I would like to do it in a simple way right now, just simply, which I mean both are simple, but I just want to illustrate the whole end-to-end solution, so it doesn't really matter into assembling this. Go ahead and click on the proxy, and what I would like you to do, again, go back to the URL where you defined it and take everything up to and including the records. Okay, so notice that what we're doing right now is we're basically including the records twice. So the records is included in the URL, and it is also included in here. And this is kind of the way to do this thing. Now go ahead and save it. This red star here indicates that these are changes that need to be saved. So once you save the changes, now at this point you can also add some documentation, and the documentation you could either you could basically point, you can upload a file that's going to be displayed, or you can just simply point to a URL that somebody could click on that will point to your environment. And I think what I'm going to do right now is I will add a URL that goes into a README or an HTML or some welcome page that I have in my WebSphere application server environment into my application that basically talks about these particular APIs, and that's what I'm going to do right now. Okay, so like I said, I would like to add that API. So what I just did, I actually went into, because I want to define it into my environment, and in this case in WebSphere. So I went ahead inside of WebSphere in my application, the Solid REST API demo, and I created a new HTML file. So I just right clicked on web and actually web content it should be, and do new, and you do an HTML file, or a web page for that matter. That's what I did. It just gives you a blank web page. And what I did after that, just literally just add welcome to Solomon's World Bank and thanks for using blah blah blah, and here's the API name and the parameters it takes, which is type and first name. And as you see, those are the same exact APIs, or I used the name that I just defined in here. By the way, I did make a quick change to it, so just to kind of put uppercase interest and uppercase for R and B and T. So now I would like to define it. So here is how you can actually access it, just literally from the host port, the application name, and then this is what I have, the Solomon World Bank. So I'm just going to copy this and put the URL in here. And again, from here, the display name, and this is going to be the Solomon World Bank APIs is what I'm going to have. Type a description. It's optional. I'm just going to keep it at that. I'm just going to go ahead and do add. Okay, and now as you see, I added the path to the documentation, and you can obviously add more attachments and documentations as well. Just to kind of one thing I ran into in here, if you do add it, you will get prompted by IE if you want to open the file or save it that's coming from this particular host. Feel free to just say save or open, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes you might run into an issue that it would just seem as if it's hung. It's actually not hung, it did upload it. All that I recommend that you do at this point is just literally open a new tab window and copy the URL into it and just reopen it and just close the other window that you had open, the browser window that is. And that's really all that you need to get that working. All right, so let's go ahead and at this point I think we're ready to test it out. So what I'm gonna do right now is I would like to kind of show you both. Again, we've done it with as you see, we've done the API. Let's just go back in here again. We've done the API with the client ID and let me just see this. We've done it with client ID and secret, and which is what we want, client ID and secret. And we've added the actual API, the path, which starts with the entry before the question mark, like I mentioned earlier. And then the second one, which is really what we used in the URL when we defined or when we made the call, as you see in here, everything up until that record. So it includes that record that we also start here with. Let's go ahead and save this. And as soon as that's done saving, which it is, let's just go ahead and test it. Okay, so when I want to test it, and this is the cool thing about the API management, is it will allow me to test it out. So let me go ahead and open the other window, which is where the WebSphere application server is running at this point, because I want to make sure that, and let me minimize this window a little bit, because as we make a call to this application server, we're going to find out that that's why I added the system out entries, so basically we can see where those that the call is happening. So let's go ahead and do that. So just watch out for the system out at this point, which is really what I care about. Open this, expand it, just make it small so you can fit R. Alrighty. So let's go ahead and I will use some different entries. So this one we did short and I did Solomon equals or name equals hi. So what I'm going to do in here in the invoke, and as you see in here when we get into the test area, oh, sorry, notice this, that tells you that the resource is not contained within a plan. So after we define, this is a very important step. After you define the API that you want to use or the resource, and we defined everything in it, now we need to make it part of a plan. And the plan that we're going to make it part of is the basically the one that's going to allow us to whether we're going to put any limitations on it or not. So let's go ahead and click on the plan at this point, and you will see under the draft plans you have the gold and silver, and for now I would like to go ahead and deploy it into the silver one because I want to test the limits also. So let's click on the silver, and you will see that right now we did not put any limitation. I told you that we're going to do this later. So let's go ahead and change the rate limit from unlimited to make it 5 calls per 1 minute. And this is the interval that I want. And after this, I have reject calls when limit is reached. The options you have is you could not reject the calls, and that's we call it as a soft reject, which basically or soft limit is that rather than rejecting it, we would just simply receive an email, we as the owner. So Solomon would receive an email saying this API exceeded the number. So it's up to you how you want to define your business. But for now, I would like to reject it just to kind of illustrate how that works. So I go ahead and applied it. Now we add a resource. Of course, as you know, you could change the limit per API. You could do it at the resource at the entire plan level. It's up to you how you want to do this. So let's go ahead and add the resource. You will see that I have this resource that's already available because I did that. And I'm just going to go ahead and add that particular resource. Now what happened when we add the resource? So step number 1, I define the API. So after defining your environment and the users, which is the thing that you do only once, now I go ahead and define my API or the resource, and as you see, it's there right now. Now the next step is I would like to deploy it. If you look at the deploy button in here, it says it's not deployed anywhere, so we need to make sure that we deploy it. So let's go ahead and do the deployment. So and you can decide which version that you want to deploy. In this case, I only have one. So if you want to make different changes to your API, you could make them on the next version, and when you're ready, you can make that one the production one, so that you're not impacting any of your existing ones as you're doing your development and test on, let's say, a newer one that you're working on. And this is very, very nice to have, actually. So let's click on the deploy. And remember, when you do deploy, it's going to tell me which environment are you trying to deploy it to. If you recall, when we created the environments, there were 2 of them. There was the sandbox, and I created the Soloman prod. I'm just going to go ahead and deploy it to my sandbox for now. The reason I defined multiple of them, I want to make sure that you see it. And there's a disconnected cloud. Now what this does, this is another important feature. This allows you to export this particular package such that you can later import that particular plan, or import it into your existing environment. So if you're saying, well, I want to do it to my sandbox, but also just in case if I crash my system, I want to make sure I have a backup of it, you can actually export it to a what's called disconnected cloud, and that you will be prompted to basically save it on your local disk. Okay, so let's just go ahead and deploy it to the sandbox. It says it has unsaved changes. Click and you guys continue deploying it. Or so let's just go ahead first and save it. Sorry, I should have done that after I did add it. So the plan's been saved. Okay, now let's go ahead and deploy it. I'm going to do it to the sandbox, and it's deploying it to my sandbox right now. I'll wait for this to get done. Okay, success. Now notice one thing. As soon as it got deployed, went from undeployed into a sandbox, and look, it's like a donut shaped circle, what we have in here, which is basically green with a little bit of open or white in the middle. What that means is that this particular API is now deployed, but it's not published. Now nobody has access to it until you publish it. So the next step for us is we are going to go ahead and publish that API. So I'm going to go back to the plans where we had it, okay? And instead of going to the draft plans, I'm going to go ahead to the deploy to. So I'm going to click on the sandbox in this case because that's where I deployed it. And you will see that I have, again, it tells me there is an API that's deployed but not published by the empty circle that you see in here. So I click on silver, and notice that now I have the ability to publish it. Now before I publish it, I need to define the consumers, because I deployed it, but now I'm saying I have an API that's deployed, but that API I haven't specified who's going to use it, whether it's available to the public or not. So let's go ahead and click on the consumers. Now notice that on the consumers I did define the member IBM API or IBM ID, and that IBM ID that I defined, by the way, when I did define it, this guy got sent an email to basically welcome an email to my IBM ID, IBM email account, with a link that allows me to click it. Once you click that link, it will actually bring you up with enter the first name, the last name, and some from and the password. And I did already all that. So when you do specify any new users, make sure that you check your email address, because that's when you specify the actual password for that particular user, and you can specify the name, which I did here as called Solomon as first name and last name IBM. And I did that because I want to make sure I differentiate between my Gmail and my IBM account. All right, so in this case, we have two options: public users or select groups. If you do it as public users, what that means that as soon as I have access to the application that I'm deploying, I can see the APIs that are available. And I could call them if I want to, right? But I have to log on first before I'm able to use them. Versus if you make it select group, is if people log on to your website, they won't even see the APIs until they actually log on. And this is useful in cases where you're saying, I would like to expose some APIs to certain users, but I have public APIs. For example, if I have some gold service that's available only to my internal customers, or some special users, obviously I don't want to expose that API outside, because this is something kind of a top secret for me, that only you have to log on, and once you log on with your ID, I can say, yep, I trust you now, I can show you those special APIs. But for the rest of the world, I'm just going to expose, the generic ones. I hope that that's very clear on how you can define the public versus specifying select group. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and make it public, so anyone can see this plan but need to sign up to actually consume it. So I'm just going to go ahead and publish it. And as you see in here, as is publishing, it's going to go into silver and then publish to sandbox. So now this has been published already. So I'm just waiting for the resources, for everything to get loaded up. But at this point, I'm very much ready. Now notice that this green now becomes solid green rather than what it used to be before. And now I have the ability to make the calls. Now let me go back. Remember, I've done all that because I want to make sure that I test my API. I did make a mistake in this video, but I think hopefully you did catch it, which is I just needed to deploy it to test it. But in my case, I also published it. So I did not have to publish it to be able to do the test of the API, because the whole point is you can deploy it and go back and test it. And then when you're happy with it, that's when you can go ahead and actually publish it. But that's okay right now because I've already published it. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the invoke. Okay. Now notice the URL is what I have in here, and I have the test, and notice that I can specify, let's say for the type, and I'm going to say the type it's going to be, let's say long, and for the first name I'm going to say solo, just to make sure that I use different one than what I have used in the past. And now I want to go back into my web application server, in this case the output or the console. Notice there's the last thing is says name equals hi, and it gives me this file not found, and I got this error when I was trying to create the previous file, so you can ignore that, it's irrelevant here. So let's go ahead and invoke it. All right, so as you see, I did invoke it, and it came back saying okay, and it told me the first name is Solo, and it says that the name is, this is a great, basically a great kind of loan that I have. It's not the best, it's great, because it's not jumbo, but it's not short either. And the type is long, and it told me the interest rate is 4.375. So this is perfect. Now let's look at WebSphere and see what WebSphere did. Here you go. Look what it did. It says, by the way, here is the API. The first name is, I'm sorry, the last one, which is what I'm looking for. It's right here. And it says the type is long. It is indeed. And the 4.375, and the name is Solo. So here you go, success. So now I just tested my API. I exposed the API that existed on my website application server machine, which by the way, in this case would be a completely different machine. I mean, in my environment in here, I actually have a system, a virtual machine that is the API management, and I have my existing laptop, which is my website application server environment. And hopefully that illustrates what we're doing in here now, how I can test it out and how everything works just great. So let's go back right now, and this is really most of what I wanted to show you as part of this particular part 3, but I still not done just yet, because now that I defined it, I defined the API, I tested it, I have the plans created. Now I would like to go ahead at this point and actually define the application that it will be exposed to the public where people can log on and take a look at the list of APIs and decide which APIs they want to use. So let's do that. Okay, so the best way now to go to the third portal that we were talking about is if you go into your environment, and you will see that up here where it says developer portal, which is, it gives you the address, which is what I would like you to kind of capture. Now remember, we deployed it to the sandbox, so this will give me this swb/sb, and that's exactly what we want to go to. And once we do that, and go ahead and continue, obviously when you run into your own production environment, you will have the correct certificate defined. Now look at this. This is my website. This is exactly what I make available to these developers who are interested in using my APIs. It says, welcome to the Solomon World Bank Developer Center. Okay, and it tells you, I haven't logged on yet, obviously, right? And it tells you, you can change the logo, and I can show you, like for example, this is the logo that you see in here. If I go into and do customize portal, you will see that you can change that into whatever logo that you want for your own corporation, so you don't have to do anything with mine in here. I mean, you can just add your own, and again, it's everything's working exactly, and you can define it as kind of as easy or as much as you want. And here's the link, by the way, to it if you want to as well. So right now, I go in here and I see the API that I want. Of course, I can't use it until I log on. So I make it public such that anybody can see the APIs that I have. But if you want to use it, you have to sign in. So I'm just going to go ahead and sign in, and I'm going to sign in with my IBM account, because remember I added IBM account as the consumer. And let's just go back. And I'm going to go ahead and sign in as Solomon. Okay, now again I come back to the portal, but this is the third one that I talked about. Now I'm logged in as Solomon. There's the home, there's the applications, the APIs, which is what you see in here, and the list of users. Now let's go to the actual API, and this is the you might have a lot of them, so there's an option to basically order by and look at them. It tells you it's a REST API, and it was created October 1st, 2014. That's the date where it got created. It's funny, actually, I'm not sure. Oh yeah, I know why, because as you see today, it's October 2nd, but when I set up my data power machine and API management, the date wasn't set up accurately there. It was a different time zone, and hence it is actually correct, but it's a different time zone. That is still October 1st there. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that particular API that I created. And if you click on the plus, you will see that this is the actual API that I'm interested in. Now, notice that the URL that I'm using, so if I'm going to call that particular, if I want to call the API from a browser that goes through the API management, because notice this is 192.168.153.5, and if you look at the host name for my web server application server machine is 192.168.2.9. So it's a different host. This is actually going through data power and going through the API management appliance that I have in here, or virtual machine in my case. And of course, it has the type equals short, the first name equals Solomon. Again, this is just a sample, right? I mean, this is in terms of the parameters. But then look, it has the client ID equals and the client secret equals. Now, where do I get the client ID and client secret, you ask? Well, let's go ahead and create the application first, because that's what I'm going to do if I'm going to be using this particular API. So we'll come back to this to actually, in fact, maybe we could just copy it and kind of leave it on the clipboard for now. Now notice that the plan is silver, that what I define it with. I never actually deployed the API into the gold plan, and hence when I do the drop down, I only see the silver. So let's go ahead and go to applications. Now the last thing I'm going to do is remember, I've defined the APIs, defined the consumers, deployed it. I could do the testing when I deploy. When I'm done testing and I'm happy with it, I can publish it into a specific plan. That makes it available. So if I come in here, you can start seeing it. Of course, you specify the consumers at that point. Now let me go back and create an application. Remember, I'm a developer. I am Solomon now. I am no longer part of your organization, if you will. I'm the person who's trying to take advantage of that particular API and expose it to developers. So I'm going to go ahead and create an application. The application name is going to be, let's say, Solomon World Bank Loan App. and this one, application that exposes the um, interest rate API. To be exact, it's going to be get interest rate by type API. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to register now this application, which I just did. Now look what happened. When I registered the application, it told me, by the way, here's the secret, and this is the one that you need to save. Um, Now, even though you need to save it and remember it, if you do lose it, you could easily come back and do a reset, in which it will give you a new one. But for now, let's just go ahead and save it. And what I'm going to do in here when I save it is I'm going to go ahead and let me just stop the recording for a second so I can find a place to put it. Okay, so now I copied it like I mentioned earlier, and I put it in a place here on I'm going to copy also. So I got the secret, and I would like to get the client ID as well. And remember, the client ID that I have um, is the one that I will be using alongside the entry here. So here's the client ID, and as you saw in there, that's the client secret. And if I go back to my portal here, you will see, by the way, I could validate that. So let's say if I have the client, the secret, but I'm not sure whether it applies here or not, you can just do verify and enter that secret, which will tell you if it's successful or not. So now with that, I just have the application ready. And what I need to do right now with that application, if you click edit on it, you can do any changes that you want to that application. All right, actually, here you go. All right, so now we have the application. Now let's go to the API. Remember, we created the API right here. Now we said that the plans that are available to me are silver or gold, right? But I did not really define a plan for it just yet. So let's go ahead and select a plan, because that's what I'm going to allow it to do, right? And this is obviously the API that's going to be used for that plan. And then I'm going to say, go ahead and use this plan. And when I do go ahead and use this plan, it's going to give me basically, okay, we're going to use this plan. The applications are available for you to use for this plan is the Solomon World Bank Loan app. Remember the one I just defined earlier? So I'm going to go ahead and select it. And then I'm going to say use this plan. So if you happen to have multiple applications, and now it is, by the way, successful, it is associated with it. So I went ahead with the third one. I created my application. This is the one that's going to be, it's going to give me the secret. Because remember, you could have multiple applications with multiple secrets and use whatever plans for the same exact API. And that's the purpose of it. If you have silver, gold, pink, black, white, whatever, whatever plans you have, you can create an application for it with a secret, and that's the application that you will be exposing out to the public and selling it out. So if Solomon um, um, or person X, who's developer looking to use that API for their own purpose, that you want to come in and start charging money for them to use, they'll come to your portal right here, and they'll see the API, because they're going to go to the home portal like I mentioned earlier, and they're going to see, oh, here's the APIs that do exist for this particular environment. Okay, sorry, the APIs, and then you can basically say, okay, from within this APIs, um, um, basically associated with this particular application. As you see in here, Solomon World Bank Loan app, and it tells you these are the APIs, and by the way, it has a silver to it. This is the API that exists with a silver plan. I give them the client ID, I give them the secret after I, let's see, sign them up with my service. And from that point on, now they can just simply start making the call and taking advantage of my API. Now, the last illustration before we end this video is, or part 3, is, now remember, I said I have 5 calls per minute. So let's go ahead and see if we can reach the 5 calls per minute. So what do I want? I want the API first of all. So let me go back to the API. I want to make sure that I have the URL for the API. Remember, I wanted you to save it to the clipboard. Of course I did, but I reused the clipboard here. So let's go ahead and paste it here. And instead of client ID, I'm just going to put the client ID, which is this number right here. Okay, and that's what I'm going to replace this one with. And of course we have the and the client secret equals, and that's the one that I'm going to replace with the client secret that I have in here. And that should be all that I want, that I need to actually get this working. Now at this point I would like you to look at let's go back to the portal with the application and look at the analytics, which basically shows me the actual calls. I mean, so far I made only one call, remember, when I did the testing. So I'm gonna go ahead right now and maybe actually issue through this browser. Okay, so through this browser right here, I'm just gonna go ahead and paste it, and I'm gonna call it a couple of times. Here's one. So remember 3375. Remember I added the rate Solomon, and first name and the type is short. If I go back to WebSphere, oh, here you go. Look, it's 3375 and short. Well, let's see what happens if I change it into jumbo instead of short, and the first name being Solomon IBM. Just to change it to kind of show you, and click that, and again it's the jumbo rate 3.075. I go back to WebSphere. Oh, here you go. WebSphere tells me, remember, I'm making the calls through the API management. Now WebSphere is automatically being updated, as you see, just to illustrate that I am calling the APIs that are hosted on the IBM, on the WebSphere application server, which is a completely different layer, obviously, than the API management layer. All right, so let me do this a couple more times. I just want to keep doing it until, let's see, I'm just going to do it Solomon I. Like I said, still want that one. Okay, and I'm going to call it one more time. One more time. One more time. Okay, now if you go back in here and let's refresh this website quickly. Okay, and if I go to the analytics, let's go back in here. Now you will see that I just called it 9 times, which is really what happened in here. Now, as you see, this is how you can keep track of how many times you are calling a particular API, and whether you want more details on it. I mean, this comes down, gives you even more information. Look at this. I mean, it's telling you, by the way, this is Solomon and it's called a couple of times, and then I got Solomon IBM, and I got just Solomon by itself. I got Solo, right? And the response time, 17 milliseconds. The first time, 518 milliseconds. All that gives you a lot of information that is very useful to you. Even sometimes the request body and the request headers and response. This is something that only returns to me the response, which is okay. That's because I use the proxy. If I actually end up using the assembly, the assemble one, you will end up seeing a lot more than what you saw in here. But hopefully this illustrates to you what I was talking about when it comes to the API management and how useful it is. The next video that I'm going to be showing you is basically the Worklight backend, where I'm going to use Worklight to develop an application that's going to be using the APIs that are defined in the API management to make a call to get the interest rate and use it actually in my Worklight application or in my mobile application. And I will be using the API management solution for that. Thank you, and I will talk to you in the next video.